The wind moved low across the pavement, catching a piece of torn newspaper and pushing it against the rusted edge of a metal trash can. A man, walking slowly with one hand deep in his coat pocket, paused without knowing why. There was a sound beneath the lid, so faint it could have been mistaken for a creak or the shuffle of wind against metal. But then it came again, a single whimper. Not sharp, not pleading, just a thread of breath, almost lost in the air. He stepped closer, fingers curling around the handle, and lifted the lid gently, as if opening something sacred. The smell hit first, sour, old, wet with rot. Then his eyes adjusted to the dim shape inside. Amid crushed cans and damp wrappers, there was movement in a torn shirt that had been folded in on itself like someone had tried, or pretended, to make a cradle. In the center of that fabric, a puppy lay curled, smaller than a hand, its body trembling with each shallow breath. Eyes sealed shut. Skin stretched thin over bones not yet strong enough to hold their own weight. He didn't speak right away. Just crouched beside the bin, motionless. The puppy twitched once, then stilled. Its mouth opened slightly as if searching for warmth that wasn't there. The ribs moved again. A flutter more than a breath. Carefully he reached down. The cloth peeled away damply as he lifted the bundle out. The body was warmer than he expected, but barely. He didn't cradle it like a pet. He held it the way you hold something you aren't sure will make it, in both hands. Still. The road behind him was quiet. No houses close, just open fields broken by fencing and wire. He had passed this can a dozen times, never once thinking of it. But now he walked faster. Not hurried, not panicked, but faster. The puppy's legs hung loose, one ear stuck flat against its head. He looked down once. "Hold on," he said quietly, not for reassurance, but because the silence between each breath felt too wide. At home, the man placed the shirt on a folded towel near the stove. The puppy didn't cry. It didn't squirm. Its body gave only the smallest shivers, like the last bits of cold still clinging to its spine. The man moved with quiet urgency, running warm water over a cloth, testing it against his wrist, then pressing a drop to the puppy's mouth. It didn't suck, but it didn't turn away either. Just let the moisture sit there like it wasn't sure what it meant. The towel slowly took shape beneath the tiny body. The man wrapped a second layer, then used the corner of his sleeve to dry around the mouth and paws. In the dim room, the light softened everything. The cracked counter, the scratched kettle, the man's brow as he leaned closer. Each breath from the puppy came with hesitation, as if every inhale required permission. The man stayed quiet. Not frozen, just still. He wasn't trying to fix something. He was trying not to lose something he had just found. Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, the pup shifted once in the folds of the shirt, its body curling tighter like it remembered something distant. The man lowered himself to the floor and sat nearby, knees drawn up. He didn't touch the puppy again that hour. He only watched, and each time the small chest rose, he counted it. Not with numbers, but with breath of his own, matching pace, waiting, watching. Holding that moment in the warmth of a kitchen that hadn't known a heartbeat like this before. The puppy hadn't moved in a long while. The man sat nearby, his back against the cabinet, knees drawn up, eyes fixed on the bundle beside the stove. The towel held the faintest rise and fall, like the wind had found its way indoors and was breathing through the cloth. He reached forward slowly. His hands, rough from labor and cold from air that hadn't warmed yet, hovered for a second. Then, with the care reserved for something breakable, he lifted the pup again, cradling it with both palms flat. Its belly barely expanded as it drew in another breath, the motion trembling through its limbs like a memory of warmth rather than the real thing. The head tilted sideways, mouth parted slightly, tongue dry at the tip. Its skin was still too loose across its frame, its paws limp, but there was a response, the smallest flinch in the toes when his thumb brushed the edge of its chest. He set it back down inside a fresh blanket, one folded from an old flannel shirt he hadn't worn in years. The fabric still held the scent of wood smoke and worn soap. The man poured warm water into a bowl and stirred milk powder into it, watching as the mix turned cloudy and pale. He tested a drop on the inside of his wrist, then soaked the corner of a clean rag. Kneeling again, he lowered the cloth to the puppy's mouth. The reaction came slow. A slight parting of the lips. A faint twitch in the jaw. The milk dripped in and rested on the tongue before slipping down. No swallow, just gravity doing its quiet work. Time thinned in the room. Light passed gently across the wall, hour by hour. Each time the puppy stirred, even the smallest stretch of a leg or quiver under the eye, the man shifted closer, repeating the same steps. Warm milk, gentle cloth, soft silence. No words were needed. Only once, under his breath, he whispered, "You're not done yet." It was neither hope nor command, just a recognition. Something this small, this new, wasn't ready to disappear. Outside, the day went on as usual. Wind pressing through the dry grass, a bird landing on the fence, a dog barking faintly in the distance. But here, in this small pocket of the world, everything narrowed to the space between two breaths. The pup gave a faint moan in its sleep, legs kicking once, then stilling again. Its belly looked a touch fuller now. The man noted it without celebration. He simply folded the cloth again and wiped the excess milk from its mouth. Later, as dusk brushed the edges of the window pane, the man shifted a log in the stove and placed a second towel under the blanket for extra warmth. He didn't leave the room. He sat beside the counter, near enough to listen, far enough not to disturb. The pup's breath came quieter now, less strained. The tension in its back had eased. Its body curling faintly in that newborn way, slow and uncertain. Its nose twitched once. Its ear, barely formed, lifted for a moment before falling flat again. He watched all of this without speaking. It wasn't progress he was looking for. It was presence. Proof of life in the smallest expressions. A blink, a stretch, a sigh against the fabric. When the last bit of light faded and the room turned soft with fire glow, he moved only to place another corner of the flannel over the pup's body. Its chest rose again, slower now, deeper, then settled. The man leaned his head back against the wall, eyes open. For now, it was enough. The hours passed slowly, each marked not by a clock but by the movements of something small fighting to stay. The man hadn't slept, though his eyes had closed for moments here and there, just long enough to lose the shape of time. He sat with his back to the cabinet still, legs drawn up, one hand resting lightly on the folded flannel. The puppy's body was warmer now. Its chest moved with more rhythm, though each breath still carried a quiet rasp, like wind through damp straw. At intervals, he dipped the cloth into the milk and brought it to the puppy's mouth. Sometimes there was response, a weak suckle or a tremor in the lips. Other times the milk simply pooled and slipped down. But even that was more than before. Life, however small, didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispered. The man whispered too, not out of habit, but as if the silence needed a name. "Nico," he said softly, letting the word find its shape in the dark. The pup didn't stir at first, but his ears, still thin as paper, twitched faintly against the blanket. "Nico," he said again, the way you might say something to yourself before fully believing it. The name wasn't meant to carry history or weight. It was a thread, something to hold between two lives, one still unfolding, the other watching quietly from beside a stove. The pup moaned once, breath catching in its throat. The man leaned closer, soaking the cloth again, brushing it lightly under the mouth. A drop clung to the nose before sliding down. This time the tongue moved to meet it. Wind pressed against the window as night deepened, the kind of wind that settled across fields and slipped under doors. The man reached out and folded the blanket a little tighter around the pup's side. Nico shifted slightly, his paws twitching in sleep. One leg stretched, then recoiled. His chest lifted in a fuller breath than before. His ribs still showed, sharp and narrow, but the trembling had lessened. The flannel held warmth now, and the space around them held a quiet unlike any the house had known before. Not silence, just stillness. Somewhere before dawn, as the world outside began to gray at the edges, Nico's body stirred again. This time it wasn't a twitch, but a stretch, brief and unsure. His head turned slightly and the sealed eyes fluttered. The left one, still faintly swollen, opened just a crack. No focus, no alertness, just the soft, reflexive push of instinct toward light. The man saw it and didn't move. He watched as Nico's tiny chest rose and fell, his legs twitching in uneven rhythm, one ear folded forward. Then came the sound. Not loud, not sharp, but enough to cut the silence. A cry, dry and rattled, like air pushing past something too narrow. It lasted only a moment, but it filled the space. The man placed a hand over the blanket gently, not to press, just to be near. He didn't say anything more. There was nothing that needed saying. The pup's mouth opened again, searching, and the man reached for the cloth, warming it once more in the bowl, moving slower now, not from fatigue, but from something else, a softness that had settled into the quiet. Nico suckled weakly, then turned his head and sighed. The movement was small, nearly imperceptible, but the message was clear. Something was holding on. As the first light gathered at the edge of the window, the man sat back slightly and looked at the bundle wrapped in flannel. The house was still, the fire low, the milk cooling in the bowl. And in the quietest part of the room, Nico slept again, his ear twitching once more as dawn moved gently across the floor. The morning moved gently, washing pale gold across the kitchen floor. Nico's body was still nestled in the folds of the flannel, breath rising more steadily now, the small ribs no longer fluttering in panic. When the man placed a hand nearby, Nico stretched, uncoordinated but willing, and for the first time pushed lightly with his forelimbs. His head lifted a few centimeters before falling sideways again. It was clumsy, almost weightless, but it was movement, and for a brief moment, something in the man's posture eased. He wet the cloth with warm milk and brought it close. Nico turned his head slowly, jaw working with weak instinct, drawing in the smallest sip before resting again. The man let out a quiet breath and knelt beside him. "You're doing good, little one," he murmured, though his voice stayed close to silence. But by midday, something changed. The pup no longer stretched with the same loose rhythm. Instead, his limbs grew taut and resistant. His tiny toes curled inward unnaturally, and his spine arched as if trying to shield something deep inside. When the man touched him again, there was no twitch, no subtle lean into the warmth, only a heavy stillness. Nico's chest still moved, but shallower now, the breath rattling more than before. His jaw hung loose, tongue dry again, unmoving when the milk cloth touched it. The man dipped it once more, pressed it lightly to the lips, waited. Nothing. He crouched lower, fingers along Nico's side, feeling for warmth. It was still there, but thinner somehow, as though it might slip away without notice. He didn't hesitate after that. He folded the pup inside the blanket and reached for the keys. The road stretched long and uneven, the fields on either side brittle with late-season wind. Nico lay pressed against the man's chest, wrapped tightly in cloth, held steady beneath the open collar of his coat. His body gave off no resistance now. It simply rested, limp as a leaf caught in a stream. The man drove without looking away from the line of trees ahead. At the edge of the road, the vet's sign swung gently. Sun-bleached and worn. The tires crunched softly as he pulled in. Inside, the room smelled faintly of iodine and hay. The vet moved without questions. He took Nico gently, unwrapping just enough to press a hand beneath the ribs, then ran 2 fingers along the spine, pausing where the tension curled. The man stood a few steps back, watching the movements without interrupting. The pup let out a weak sound, more air than voice, and one leg kicked sideways then stilled again. The vet lowered his voice. It's hypothermia, likely neurological damage too. Organs were underfed too long. We'll do what we can, but... He trailed off and didn't finish. He didn't need to. The man nodded once, slowly, and moved to Nico's side as the vet placed a warming pad under the blanket. A drip was prepared, taped gently to the pup's tiny leg. The light above the table buzzed faintly as the fluids moved, drop by drop, into veins still learning how to carry anything at all. Nico didn't cry. He didn't fight. His eye, the one that had opened just that morning, had closed again, swollen now with strain. His ear twitched once, then fell flat. The man sat nearby as the vet adjusted the line. He didn't ask for guarantees. He didn't speak again. He simply watched the rhythm of the drip, the rise of Nico's side beneath the blanket, and the slight tremble that passed now and then through his fragile spine. Time moved without pace in that room. There were no next steps, only this moment, where life stood unsure at the edge of something the man could not name. In the stillness, Nico's paw shifted against the cloth, as if reaching for warmth already fading. Outside, wind moved low across the tall grass, bending the stalks in slow waves beneath a sky beginning to pale toward evening. The door eased open without sound, and the man stepped into the quiet. In his arms there was nothing, only the weight of what had been. The flannel lay folded in the crook of his elbow, still holding a trace of warmth from where Nico had lain, a heat that faded slower than memory. He moved with careful steps, as though sound might undo the stillness that had settled since dawn. The stove had gone cold, its fire having burned down sometime while he was away. He didn't relight it. He simply knelt beside it, set the blanket down, and touched the place where the pup's head used to rest. The shape was still there, soft and small, pressed into the cloth like an echo. The man lowered his hand and sat cross-legged beside it, back against the cabinet, gaze resting on the dim floor. No words came, only silence, shaped by the absence of breath. That night the house held its hush. The bowl still sat on the counter, half filled with milk gone cool. The towel in the sink was damp where it had been rinsed too many times. Outside, the wind returned, threading through the dry grass with a rhythm that sounded like footsteps too far to follow. The man didn't move much. His hands rested open on his knees. Now and then, his eyes shifted to the flannel. Not searching, just remembering. The name he had whispered so many times felt caught in the air, suspended between walls that knew more than they let on. The next morning came without shift. He stepped outside, watered the plants, refilled the dish he'd left beneath the porch, an old habit for strays, though few ever came this far. The rhythm of the day passed through him without resistance. No noise, no effort, just the slow return to quiet after a presence too brief to root itself. He left the blanket where it was, beside the stove, untouched. He didn't know why, only that it didn't feel right to move it yet. 3 days passed. The wind changed direction once, and a light rain fell for half a morning, darkening the soil outside the door. Then, on the 4th, there was a box, plain, shallow, lined with straw and a torn sweater sleeve. He found it just after sunrise. The lid had been left half open, angled to let air in, but not cold. Inside, 2 pups lay curled, older than Nico had been, but thin and wary. Their fur was matted at the edges, their eyes wide, watching but not moving. One lifted its head, ears low, and let out a low sound, uncertain and small. The man crouched beside them. No note, no markings, only the faint smell of soil and damp cloth. He reached in slowly, palm open, letting his fingers rest near their paws. One pup sniffed and turned away. The other pressed forward just enough to feel the warmth, then stopped. He lifted the box gently and carried it inside, setting it near the same place Nico had rested. The flannel remained there, folded still, untouched. He didn't wrap them. Not yet. He only placed a fresh towel nearby and warmed milk in the same bowl. The pups didn't feed right away. They watched, blinking slowly, bodies tense, but there was no fear in their movements, only confusion, hunger, and waiting. Later, the man stepped outside again, looking out across the empty road. He didn't know who had brought them, only that someone had. Maybe someone who had heard or seen him at the clinic, or remembered how he used to leave scraps by the gate. The reason didn't matter. What mattered was the quiet shift, the way the wind carried sound differently now, how the house held something again. Not quite joy, but not loss either. Inside, the pups stirred together, their bodies touching lightly, eyes beginning to settle. The man poured the warm milk into a shallow dish and placed it beside them. Then he sat nearby, as he had once before, legs folded, back straight, saying nothing. Outside, the light moved slowly across the grass, bending the stalks in long shadows that stretched without urgency, quiet as breath returning. Word count 600. The story is now complete. Let me know if you'd like to adapt it for narration format or start a new one.